After this most recent trade deadline, the direction of many of these NBA teams are being laid out fully before us. Some of these plans are in reaction to the very unpredictable season we've been having, as teams who are expected to be fringe contenders like the Minnesota Timberwolves or the Cleveland Cavaliers are now looking like legitimate threats down the stretch of the season. While the expectations that we had on others like the Lakers and Jordan Poole have been pulled down to depths previously unseen, with it getting so bad in LA that LeBron has been throwing around hints that he's trying to get to the Big Apple now, and Jordan Poole dropping an astounding 0 points, fouling out, and then getting booed in his own home arena. This season has been very interesting so far, to say the least. I mean, we had Kelly Oubre get hit by a car and still recovered faster than Ben Simmons' back. Actually, you know, now that I say that part out loud, it might be the most predictable thing to happen so far this season. But anyways, now that we're a little over halfway through this year, it's probably a good time to take an overlook on the season to see how a lot of these teams in both conferences should stack up come playoff time. One good test to determine this is actually one that NBA legend Phil Jackson uses when assessing whether a team is a true contender or not. And that's the 40 wins before 20 loss rule. That's pretty self-explanatory, but we have done a video talking about this rule and how historically true it's been that you can check out right up here. But for this video, we'll just be applying it to this current season. And with that in mind, you have to talk about the Boston Celtics, who of course are the first team to hit that 40-win benchmark, doing so well before getting close to 20 losses. In fact, I think it's safe to say that there hasn't been a bigger threat in the regular season than the Boston Celtics so far this year. Stepping into TD Garden and coming out with a win is something that only the Nuggets, Clippers, and Lakers have been able to do this year, and if you didn't notice, there's a severe lack of Eastern Conference teams that have actually won in Boston. So in a recent era where it seems like home court advantage in the playoffs has meant less and less, this year it should be a real factor for any team that's set to go up against the dominant Celtics, who of course also went out and added some more pieces that are going to fit in perfectly to what this team is building. Xavier Tillman adds some more depth to the squad. He might not be a great body to throw in front of Giannis, but a body nonetheless, as well as adding Jaden Springer, if he gets any minutes, who's really proven to be a solid wing defender. Neither of these guys are going to add a whole lot to the offense, but between Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, KP, and Drew Holiday, I think they have enough offensive weapons. This Celtics team is a serious threat. Now, that's not really something that's probably new to a lot of NBA fans, but that also doesn't mean they have a complete chokehold on the East, as the Knicks have been climbing their way up the standings with the addition of OG Anunoby, as he's brought a new defensive feel to this team and drawing some serious looks for Defensive Player of the Year. But as Toronto Raptors fans are more than well aware of, this is the same dude OG has always been, but now that he's in a big market, he's finally getting those nods. Unfortunately, however, it was just announced that OG will be missing some time as he's having a surgery to remove some bone fragments in his right elbow, as well as Julius Randle being down for some time too. But both players are expected to come back in time for playoffs. In their absence, the team will be welcoming two new offensive weapons in Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks. Now, both of these guys are getting a little up there in age, and neither play a whole lot of solid defense, so it'll be interesting to see if Tibbs is going to try and grind their bones down to dust till they look as tired as Taj Gibson, or let them ride the bench once playoff time comes. In all seriousness though, they should actually be another great addition to the Knicks, who have done a great job at this trade deadline without giving up a single first-round pick or really any of their top 3 players. Knicks fans should really be looking forward to this postseason as they rally behind Jalen Brunson and the rest of the squad, as it seems there's really only a few people that could stop this team. One of those being Julius Randle, and the others being potentially the Cleveland Cavaliers, who have been on fire lately, winning 16 out of their last 17 games. And a lot of this success can be attributed to Donovan Mitchell playing at an MVP level, as he's started to really embrace the leadership role of this Cavs team as the vision has started to become more clear, sending high praises to his team for their unselfish style of basketball that's helped them succeed. The team has also found a true defensive identity, as they currently have the second highest rated defense in the entire league, with Jared Allen being a true anchor for the team, between him and Mobley making it a pretty tough decision to try and crash the paint. And despite not making an all-star team due to the crazy amount of talent emerging this season, Jared Allen's actually been putting up near identical offensive and defensive stats as the year that he did make the all-star team. Not to mention the third season breakout that Evan Mobley is now finally having, averaging almost 20 and 10 with a steal and 0.7 blocks a game since returning from his injury. Although Boston is the only team to officially hit that 40 win mark before 20 losses, making them the only true contenders for Phil's rule, if the Knicks and the Cavs keep their hot streaks alive, they could definitely reach that threshold as well. Either way though, they do seem like valid threats going into this postseason. However, the same might not be able to be said about some of the other quote-unquote top teams of the East, like the Bucks. As despite the Bucks' record being impressive, there are still many problems with this team, and to fix some of them, they hired the NBA's only Nepo coach, Doc Rivers, which has gone about exactly how you'd expect it. After starting off 1-5 with the team, Doc has been quick to blame everything from altitude to time zones to, believe it or not, the team playing defense too hard. I don't think bringing in Dr. Glenn Rivers was the best decision to fix many of the problems this team has that are only going to get highlighted come Doc's favorite time of the year, playoffs, as they are finding success now, but all of that will go out the window in a 7-game series with the massive hole they have on defense, as teams have time to learn that weakness and truly exploit it. They did make up for it a little bit by going out and grabbing the self-proclaimed most underrated defender in the league, Patrick Beverley, as his belt-to-ass tour seems to be swiftly moved to the Midwest. Giannis, of course, is still doing Giannis things while actually staying healthy, only missing 2 games so far this season. But with him also playing close to a career high in minutes, that also might come back to bite them in the playoffs. And with Dame starting to regress now that he's in Milwaukee, it's yet to be seen if he'll actually be able to carry that load with Giannis out in the playoffs. Never mind the fact that the entire starting lineup now has an average age of 34. We'll have to wait and see if the team's legs can hold out in a 7-game series or not. And speaking of injuries and underperforming in the playoffs, Joel Embiid's 76ers are another team that have their own set of problems. As everyone knows, Joel recently just got booked for his surgery to repair his meniscus with hopes that he'll be able to make it back for the postseason. But that still requires this squad actually staying in playoff contention, as they do look pretty rough at times without Embiid on the court. And even if he does make it back, it's not like he's had the best track record for success, being the only MVP to not make a conference finals. Of course, there are other teams you always got to worry about, like the Miami Heat, but the rest of the East seems pretty wide open, for a chance at a first-round exit at least. That is, except for franchises like the Pistons, who gave out the largest coaching contract of all time to Monty Williams, only for him to start a guy the team would eventually be forced to cut a month later, like a scene from Moneyball. As for Phil Jackson's metric of a true contender, there is a clear winner in the East with the Celtics, but it's clear that you're also going to need to keep an eye on the Knicks and Cavs as well.
While the East has seemed pretty cut and dry so far with the Celtics holding firmly on top, the West has 4 teams all fighting for that #1 spot. The Thunder, Timberwolves, Clippers, and Nuggets have been clustered at the top and have been moving away from the rest slowly. These teams have definitely looked good, but at the same time, there hasn't exactly been a Western team as feared as the Celtics are in the East yet, with the top Western teams being about 4 wins back from the Celtics right now. Before we jump to any conclusions about this, the West doesn't look as top heavy as the East does at the moment, and teams like the Lakers or Warriors that can put up a fight against anybody currently being 9th and 11th seeded are proof of that. The first team to talk about in the top of the pack has to be OKC, who have honestly exceeded even the highest of expectations this season. The continued development of younger players on the team, plus the addition of a surprisingly NBA-ready Chet Holmgren, has really made this squad a force to be reckoned with. On top of all of this, SGA is playing at an MVP level, dropping 31 points per game while on a team with not enough ball to go around as it is. The team is seriously looking super scary and impressive. You can absolutely expect a deep run out of the OKC Thunder come playoffs. The only problem is that this team is still pretty young, being one of the youngest teams in the league right now. So given the lack of experience, don't be surprised if these guys match up against a more experienced team and get edged out of a playoff series. Luckily, the team made a deadline trade for Gordon Hayward to beef up the punching power of the team. Adding Hayward isn't a surefire trip to the finals, but he most certainly will do his part. At the very least, Hayward will be a quality veteran to support the continued development of OKC's very young core. This team is not only good in the present, it definitely has one of the most promising futures in the entire league if they can retain their core. Expect them to make some real noise in a few years if the Hayward acquisition isn't enough this year. The next team to talk about is the Minnesota Timberwolves. This team is currently tied for first with the Thunder and has similarly had a surprising come-up spearheaded by a young player. Anthony Edwards has proven that he is that guy on Minnesota, scoring 25 points per game this season while also upping his efficiency numbers. And he's not even 23 yet, which is the scariest part. While Ant has proven that he's already the alpha dog in Minnesota, the team behind him has been just as responsible for the exceeded expectations. Rudy Gobert is looking like his old self, and has actually managed to look as seamless as possible playing next to Cat, despite not being able to fit into the team for basically all of last year. Rudy is the defensive monster the Wolves traded that massive haul for. This team is in a weird spot, as stars Gobert and Cat are experienced, yet the leader of the team, Anthony Edwards, will have just turned 23 by the time the playoffs are on. To be honest though, if there's one player that young to take a leap in this year's playoffs and truly show his team is here to stay, it might be Edwards. Those two teams tied for first seed are looking deadly for sure, but believe it or not, there's actually a third team tied for first, the Denver Nuggets. There's honestly not much to say about these guys that you don't already know, however. Same core of Jokic, Murray, MPJ, and Aaron Gordon from last year when they won the chip. A few role players gone, a few role players added. They've been chilling with a likely championship hangover for the first half of the season, but have quietly been stacking up wins to the point where we might actually see them take a solid hold of first soon. They basically have the same record now that they had at this point last season, and if I were a betting man, I'm taking the Nuggets to make it out of the West this year and possibly just win a chip again. Jokic doesn't always have the flashiest games besides his wicked passes, so it's easy to forget that he is the best player in the league at the moment. But rest assured, he's out there doing his thing just like he has been for years. Jamal Murray is also possibly the most slept on guard in the league. Going back to last year's playoffs, Jamal did more than his part, so don't sleep on him come playoffs or he might drop 50 on your favorite team, as long as he's not poached by the Raptors to add to their Canadian-born core. While these three teams are all tied for first, the next team is only half a game back. The Los Angeles retirement home, Clippers, are knocking on the door of the top Western spot after acquiring Harden this year. This team might not be as young or fast as the other three, but it by far has the most experienced core. If this team can stay healthy, and that's a big if, they could absolutely smash any team they go up against, provided Kawhi and PG are playing their best games. That's really the thing with this team though, health. Even before Harden came to the team, Kawhi and PG could have beaten any team in the playoffs if they both weren't crippled for the opposite half of every season. Almost just alternating injuries with each other it seemed. But something about this year really seems different. All three stars have stayed relatively healthy, and the team behind them is looking pretty solid. If the cards finally align for the Clippers, expect them to be an absolute contender for making it out of the West, and possibly even winning a chip. The big three they've assembled, plus Westbrook on the second unit, have accepted their roles and make the most out of their possessions. The Clippers have leveraged most of their draft capital to build this team, so even with the advanced age of their core, we can expect them to keep these guys around with extensions. The Clippers are what they are. Come playoffs, if they're still humming along, they might be able to take on any of the top teams in the West. While these are the top 4 teams in the West by a pretty firm margin at the moment, there are a few teams that could easily knock on the door of that top 4 group by the end of the regular season. First off, the Suns are not too far behind the main 4, and have been hobbled for the better chunk of a season without Bradley Beal. Now that he's back, they've been going on a bit of a tear and are looking to break into that top tier of teams in the West. The Suns have gone for more roster depth for their deadline trade, adding Royce O'Neal and David Roddy to the roster for 3 second-round picks. Those two should be very nice for a Suns team whose main concern is absolutely depth outside of the big 3. Durant and Booker have played massive minutes this year, and a bit of depth might allow for more rest on the road leading into the postseason. Another team that is looking to really make a push going into the playoffs is the Dallas Mavericks. The team has honestly been struggling as of recent, and it was feeling like Luka and Kyrie would have to continue dropping insane numbers due to an extremely subpar supporting cast. This may change with the deadline additions of PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford. The Mavs needed help on the front court for a long time, and despite the struggles, they are still 8th in the West. This means that if the new guys are able to gel somewhat fast, we could be seeing the Luka Doncic Mavericks finally look serious in the playoffs after all these years. It's important to mention that Kyrie hasn't blown up this year on X or in interviews, but his character volatility could always torpedo a season. While the West is looking like an absolute bloodbath that could turn into anyone's conference, there are a number of teams that feel like this just isn't their year, and they could fold once the playoffs hit. For starters, the Minnesota Timberwolves look so good, I personally want them to do well and make a huge run in the playoffs. The only problem with this is that Rudy Gobert plays a key role on the team. A lot of times in the playoffs, Rudy Gobert gets played off the court, and we have no reason to believe that he's changed. Cat has also not been the best playoff performer historically. It really does seem to be up to Ant to get this team to a deep run. Cat and Gobert might be who they are at this point in their careers, but we still don't know Ant's ceiling, and he might be enough to carry the team into a playoff run. Another team that we may not be able to trust is the Sacramento Kings. This team is in such a better spot than it has been for 2 decades, so it pains me to say this, but it doesn't look like the Kings will be able to reach their goal of a deep playoff run. Fox and Sabonis are great, but they just haven't been able to get results so far, and the competition runs deep in the West. Hopefully they surprise everybody with some nasty performances in a deep run, but I just wouldn't count on it. Another team that can't be trusted is the Pelicans because of this man right here. I feel like that's all I have to say about this. Zion has already been through enough media hate, but we still have to state facts here. We're all rooting for Zion, but he needs to show his interest in being a competitive NBA player long term. Well, there you have it for the midseason update. There have been a lot of interesting moves on and before the deadline, and with this season being wide open, it makes it extremely interesting. Especially for the teams that just tooled up and are looking to make a push deep into the playoffs while they still can. We've got some hungry young contenders competing with the usual suspects. It seems like every week a new team is rattling off a 10-win streak and making a push in the standings. Funny enough, one of the more predictable pieces this year has been that bad teams continue to lose. As for the top 4 or 5 teams in both conferences, it really looks like anybody's season.